House of the Dragon is honestly the only TV show that I've watched on a weekly basis in years. I don't really watch TV shows nowadays, and I don't really know if it's just because I haven't got enough time to sit through a series, or if it's just because I don't have that much dedication to stick for a show on a weekly schedule. But if I do find one, it's quite a rare occasion, and House of the Dragon is one of them. Part of it includes just how good the show is, from the dialogue, the set pieces, its world building, and another part of it is of course the dragons, to which I'm going to focus this video on. I absolutely love the way these things are portrayed in the show, and how they're not just some generic fantasy monster that's usually shown in Western media. From the unique and interesting designs, and small little details that set each dragon apart, and even for the fact that the dragons as a whole isn't even the main point of attention for the show. They really are just the icing on top of a really solid TV series. They're designed to feel realistic, they're unpredictable, and one of the main points that House of the Dragon tries to convey is that these things cannot be controlled or ordered around like an animal. Nonetheless, these dragons are portrayed on the show as unstoppable sentient flying flamethrowers, and that gives me an idea. What would it be like hunting these things on a Monster Hunter setting? Of course, Monster Hunter is no stranger to conventional dragons existing in this universe, and the dragons that appear in the world of Game of Thrones would fit just right in a setting like Monster Hunter. Now, there aren't a whole lot of dragons that I can mention off from the show, as it is only in its first season, although the good news is there is just enough information for me to go into detail. So before I go any further, first off, this video is obviously going to contain a shit ton of spoilers on what happens on the show, so please do not go any further into the video if you haven't watched the series completely. And secondly, even though each dragon of the show is different, they are still your conventional Western inspired dragon. All they can do is fly and breathe fire, so not entirely as over the top or crazy as most dragons you'd fight in Monster Hunter. So for that, all the dragons I'll go over will be purely fire element, which to be fair really isn't bad considering the amount of fire monsters we got in Sunbreak, but that's just me. So here we are, if the dragons from the Game of Thrones universe came to Monster Hunter. Let's do it. Up first is the first dragon that appears on the show, Syrax. I'd say that this thing is on the same size range as the Rathian, and quite honestly she doesn't really strike me as an intimidating monster to face. She's owned by the main character of the show, so Syrax isn't really supposed to be this fierce monster in the series. In fact, you don't really see any scenes of Syrax fighting her in a battle. Her overall design and appearance doesn't really scream menacing, and the one time she does breathe fire, it's not really out of anger. If anything, Syrax is there mainly to show off the fantasy aspects of the show. They're not really designed for the violence or tension that you'd usually expect from a show that's a prequel to Game of Thrones. And if a dragon like Syrax would appear in a Monster Hunter setting, she'd probably be a low to mid tier monster that you will face like a Rathian or a Basarios. A beginner level wyvern that you'd encounter in starting areas like the Shrine Ruins or the Ancient Forest, although of course she is still a threat, but not as big as a threat when compared to other wyverns in the Monster Hunter universe like a Rathalos or a Regios. Equipment wise, I'd say the stuff you would make out of Syrax would probably appear like the gear you'd make from the Call of Taroth. And yes, it is because Syrax is gold color, I know, very original, but it wouldn't be out of the box to think so. However, I wouldn't really think Syrax would be on the same threat level as a Call of Taroth, so I'd have to place her as a lower level monster to hunt. But a dragon that would definitely give hunters more than a problem would have to be the biggest dragon that's ever appeared in the Game of Thrones world, Vhagar. Holy shit is she massive. She's portrayed in the show to be a century years old, and there is a lot of history and lore regarding this dragon. And in this show, my god is she immense. In certain scenes where she's in, you really feel a sense that Vhagar is this ancient creature from the way her look is presented with her torn wings and how worn out and old her body appears. The way Vhagar behaves and moves slowly adds to that, but really, the main thing that stands out is that this thing is just enormous. Especially in the season finale where she just dwarfs a much younger dragon. And speaking of that part in the finale, the lack of speed from her goes completely out of the window once she gets pissed and just brute forces her way into tearing this younger dragon apart. It's just one of the many memorable things that happened in the show for me. Oh, and the fact that this thing is written by probably the most edgiest and over the top character in the show helps out a bit. Honestly, if there was a thing in Monster Hunter that could compare to Vhagar, it would probably be something like a Lao Shanglong. Simply for the fact that they're both ancient and giant creatures that move slowly, except that Vhagar can actually fly, and she can breathe fire, so that automatically puts her above in difficulty compared to the Lao Shanglong, and also for the fact that those points make her infinitely more fun than fighting the Lao Shanglong. I would genuinely love to fight this thing in a fortress-like map where you go off fighting her in stages, slowly wearing her down in different set pieces to really make her fight be something more of a spectacle. And just imagine repelling her with a Dragonator. My goodness, would that be a moment when fighting a massive creature like her. Going back to her being this slow-moving creature, you're obviously not going to expect her to be a fast-paced fight, so I expect the fight to be more of a grounded experience. Where she uses her size and bulk to just flatten hunters, tremors are going to be constant in this fight, and of course her health pool is going to be huge, so it's going to take a few minutes to take her down. And as for that fire breath of hers, it's probably going to be a one-shot to hunters, so that could be her special move. On top of all that, Vhagar is definitely going to be a Elder Dragon tier monster that you'll get to face in the post game, and the same goes for equipment too, kind of like the way Geismagorm's equipment are. High rarity items that are at the end of the crafting tree that would take a ton of grinding to craft up, so overall she is more than a perfect candidate to hunt. But by far the most terrifying and unique looking out of all of the dragons that's appeared in the show is Caraxes. Out of all of the dragons in House of the Dragon, Caraxes I believe would be the perfect candidate in fitting in the Monster Hunter universe. That elongated deformed body type that Caraxes has definitely makes him stand out as this serpent-like monstrosity with wings. He very much reminds me of a thinner looking Crimson Fatalis. I haven't really touched on the sound designs for the dragons of this show, so I'll mention it here now. Caraxes has this very distinct shrieking roar every time he appears on the show. It really gives off this sickly feeling for the dragon, although Caraxes doesn't really have anything wrong with him. It's just how he sounds, and it does add to his distorted design. Plus, Caraxes also has a lot of action scenes in the show, so that's a perfect way of showing off how he would act and behave if we get to hunt him. In one scene where this thing breathes fire, it literally disintegrates some guy with his breath, and Caraxes can do this consistently. Despite the previously mentioned Vhagar being the biggest dragon of the series, Caraxes is still huge. But what makes him more dangerous is that he's quicker and flies much faster than Vhagar, which would probably make dealing with this monster more difficult on top of his fire breath. The way this dragon is shaped could also help with his mobility when fighting off hunters. That long neck is definitely going to be useful in attacking hunters from all directions, and especially helps with his fire breath. And I will bet that this dragon can cover a large area in a quick amount of time during the fight. Going by his equipment, I'd probably predict Caraxes' armor and weapons would look something like Safi'jiiva's gear. From the monster's aesthetics alone, it wouldn't be far off. And of course, I would definitely put Caraxes as an endgame monster, or at the very least a final boss to a game's storyline. Plus, I'd go far as to say that he would even make it as a flagship monster of sorts, just by going off how much of a threat and difficult of a fight Caraxes would be. And it would be appropriate that he would have his own unique area like most endgame Elder Dragons would have. Something like the Forlorn Arena or the Secluded Valley. Or maybe even that beach area where he's fighting in the Stepstones could be a great place to fight him, with all that fire, debris and the night sky adding into the mood for the hunt. Despite the fact that these dragons aren't as otherworldly or as over the top as most traditional dragons that you'd fight in Monster Hunter, it's still interesting to see how these things will fare in a different universe, and with that, definitely a topic of discussion. What I love about this first season of the show is that there's still more dragons apart from the 3 that I've mentioned, and although they're not shown as much as the dragons that I've mentioned, there's still a second season to look forward to, with hopefully even more of these monsters to show up, so I will definitely make a part 2 for this video in the future. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like at the end, please leave your opinions and ideas down below in the comments, and I usually don't ask for subs, however this channel is just touching distance away from reaching 500. So I will be forever in your debt if you leave a sub because more content like this is coming in the near future, so until then I shall see you soon.